Hi and welcome back to my channel. It's me, Lauren, film student extraordinaire, and I'm back with a video, obviously. Quick shout out, the cat's back. I'm not sure if he'll move or it'll just be this lump, but that's exciting. And yeah, so today I am answering a request from one of you guys to do a video on story structure for film.
Was kissing you with my eyes open.
So most of the specifics are going to be more towards a short film, but some of the things are really applicable whether it's a feature or a short, and I will make note of that there. I am basing pretty much my whole spiel, where is it, from this amazing book. This is not sponsored, but this is like a great book, Writing Short Films by Cowgill. I had to read it for class. And it's amazing. It's an incredible book, and that's where I'm getting like the real meat and potatoes for this video, just because I wanted to make sure I wasn't just giving like my spiel opinion. I wanted to get like a real professional look to tell you guys. So I have some notes in it's actually my screenwriting notebook, but I figured because this has to do with story structure, I was like, I might as well do it in this book because this is where I'm keeping all that stuff together. So we're gonna lean back in my chair, and I'll probably lean forward at other times and just get into it. First off, when you think of the structure of film, it really all comes from the script. And the script is like the blueprint of the film. It is the framework. It's what you build everything else upon. Now it's interesting to note because some people think like the script, that's the final thing. Like, it's not. The script is the first version, the blueprint. And then it goes into production, and then the real final version of the film is made in the editing room. But you can't even get to that point if you don't have the script. So the script is really where we're really be talking about the structure. The structure of the film is born in the script. Also to note, this is a visual media. Cinema is visual. So while you do need to have, well, you don't need to have, while you often have dialogue to help convey information and relationships, it really needs to be shown visually if possible. Show, don't tell. So much easier said than done, like incredibly so much easier said than done. But we still gotta think about showing, not telling, when we're conveying information for a story. So here we have, I'm just gonna read these off and then I'll explain them. So whether it's a feature or a short, the beginning of a film must set up a dramatic problem the audience understands. The middle then builds the story's rising action, which intensifies to the final climax and resolution. Which is like kind of vague, but that's like the basic framework. So if we think about like a movie that maybe lots of people have seen, you could say, well, maybe not people have seen it, but if we're gonna go with like, say, Lord of the Rings, we're gonna pretend that like all the movies are together for the sake of this example. At the beginning, it sets up, you meet all the characters, and there's the problem, right? We gotta get the ring to Mount Doom. That's like a very basic problem. I mean, it's a complicated thing in the story, but it's like a very easy thing to think about. Then the middle, the rising action, we could say like the whole first movie, Fellowship of the Ring, is setting it up. Okay, he just made a noise. I'm not sure if you picked it up on the camera. Then the rising action, we could say, is the two towers. People are getting separated, people are getting captured, we're moving closer to the goal, we're moving closer and closer to Mordor. And then the final one, Return of the King, where, you know, it's crazy, there's battles, you almost think, oh my god, somebody's gonna die, and then, you know, spoiler, the ring gets thrown into the fire. But that's not it, it doesn't just end. In fact, this movie seems to have a million endings, but then it kind of settles down, the resolution happens. You know, there's a wedding, people sail off into the Undying Lands, like it closes out. Now that's a very long example, but even in a short film, you need to have something like this. So a short film that's talked a lot about, like in like classes, a short is known as, there's a short called Lunch Date. And that in the beginning, a woman misses her train, so then she goes and buys some food at like a little cafe in, I think, Grand Central Station. She goes to get napkins or whatever, and she returns, she finds a homeless person is eating her food. And this is where she's like, that's the problem. She wants her food back, but he won't give her food back. So the rising action, you know, it's like, is she gonna, I'm like, why is he eating my food? And you know, then he gets her some coffee and they're kind of in a conversation. She's kind of confused. And then the climax is when her new train's announced. She leaves and she's like, oh wait, I forgot my packages. She goes back, realizes that she'd gone back to the wrong booth because her untouched food and her packages are at a different booth than where the homeless guy was. And then the resolution is she like, haha, laughs, and then she goes to get the train. So whether it's like a big dramatic cross-nation hiking adventure journey or like eating lunch, every story has these elements. And then, yeah, but it does depend on like the length. Even with a short film, a 3-minute short film is very, very different than a 10 to 20-minute short film. Technically, shorts can go like, I think, all the way up to like under an hour, so. But generally a short is, I'd say, under half an hour, if not under 15 minutes. The longer it is, it needs to have a stronger midpoint, and that's because in the middle of a film, the longer it is, there's a high chance that it's going to drag, and if it drags, then the audience is really, you know, taken out of the film, and, you know, it's just a bust. Like, you don't want to be taken out of the film. Like, that's just not fun. Now that I kind of addressed this overarching thing, we're going to dive much deeper into the story structure and how it evolves. A setup, whether it's a feature or a short, needs to accomplish a few things. You need to orient the audience to the characters, the world of the story, the time frame, the mood, and you want to like give some clues as to the theme, and then present the conflict or establish the basis for the conflict. The longer it is, like if it's a really short thing, you got to get that conflict going right away, but if it's going to be a little longer, you can just kind of set up the grounds for the conflict to come later. And shorts must like really get this done quickly. If it's a longer short or a feature, like you might be able to have like 15 to 20 pages to get the setup. But if it's like a 4-minute film, you gotta do that like page 1 pretty much. Any other important information basically can be learned later as the story progresses, or it's like just not important to know. The main exposition is what's vital for the audience to understand, and that's like what they have to know about the hero and what they have to know about the conflict. And these things they could realize are like kind of wrong. Like there could be a twist at the end, whether it was they had the wrong idea about the character, but they have to think they know something, because otherwise, like, why do they care about this person or thing? Like, why do they care about the problem? They need to get hooked in, and the way you can hook someone and invest them is giving them the vital exposition. Also, in a short, I wrote down, for some reason, it's obvious, but every line counts. Like, if you have to have a 5-page film, a 5-page script, which would be about 5 minutes, you can't wax on and on about, like, the shape of the sun. Like, no, not gonna happen. And there's also something that's called the inciting incident. And the inciting incident is what like sets the story in motion, but this doesn't mean it comes after we've introduced the protagonist. It could happen before. So for example, like in maybe like disaster films, sometimes you meet the character and you experience them go through like the disaster, and then you follow them. But sometimes, like maybe there's already been like a fire or something, and then we meet the character who we care about. So it doesn't really matter, but the story can't really get going until we have the disaster. Like in the movie, I think The Impossible, there's like the tsunami. Like we can't watch this family at their resort for that long, but we're like, this is boring, nothing is happening. We need the tsunami to come kick everything off. The goal is to get the story in motion ASAP, because, I mean, there are some films that are a little different, maybe more expressionist, or they kind of break a few rules, but generally, I think for the purpose of this video, I'm just gonna go with like typical story structure. But like one of my favorite films, like Ron Belleza, that does not have a typical like story structure. It's more of a meandering journey through this fat film, but like that's a work of a great artist. Like you can't just make a film like that. Like you have to know the rules of structure in order to break the rules of structure and make a great movie. Okay, so yeah, now the main action has begun. And the main action is what the protagonist does to achieve her goals, the conflict she meets along the way, and the support she meets, and how it affects her. So the advising action, like it has to kind of go back and forth. It needs to go in waves. Generally, if someone's always like losing at something, we're not gonna expect they're gonna win at the end. So it needs to escalate, but also like go back. But every time it goes back, it can't go back all the way to the beginning. It has to kind of go up do, 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 do. Or maybe I should go like this. Do, 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 do. So you have to be like, is he gonna make it or is she gonna make it or not? But you do need to get this tension to escalate, which is why conflict generally needs to increase. You can't have like the biggest fight happen at the beginning. It needs to be like a small fight, and then a little bigger fight, and then a little bigger than that, and then the huge battle. Once the problem has surfaced, then the hero formulates a plan of action and starts going at it. Now, this plan of action can be communicated through dialogue. Often it is communicated through dialogue in a film, whether they're like, we need to ace this test, or we need to stop this bad guy. Sometimes it's just shown, like maybe they have a plan, like in a heist movie, it's usually pretty obvious. Whether they say like we're getting the diamond, or when they like do that thing where they throw like they unscroll like a map of or a blueprint like of the museum or the safe, and then you understand what they're trying to do, like what their plan is. But that needs to be communicated through to the audience, and that's because audience needs to get their initial reading. They need to decide, all right, do we think that they're going to succeed or not? Because that's what's going to make them watch and wonder, like, am I correct? Am I going to be surprised? Is there going to be a twist? As the protagonist is persevering, like, we learn more about him or her. Because you really get to understand a character through what their behavior is. You can say a lot of things, but the audience is not going to believe in your character unless they see the character do something that goes alongside what they have said they would do or goes against it. So action and conflict reveal character truths. This helps the audience gain insight into the real meaning of the story, because often the meaning of the story is probably a little bit deeper than the initial thing. Like if someone's going after gold, I mean, maybe not now so much because people are a little more okay with more darker content, but usually maybe in the past it would have been like, maybe you don't get the gold, but you realize that you have love, or you have a friend or a family or something like that. And that's the real meaning of the story. But if you're thinking, okay, well, conflict, I've said fights a lot, but they don't have to be a fight. So we're going to talk about the different types of obstacles characters face, because obstacles are the clearest form of conflict, and an obstacle doesn't need to be like a rock. It could be man, society, nature, or the character himself or herself. For example of man, this would be like the antagonist. So the antagonist doesn't have to be like a villain and totally evil. Like in a Disney movie, there usually is like a clear evil villain, whether it's, you know, Ursula or Maleficent. There's like, that's the villain. But the antagonist could also just be someone who opposes the protagonist's goals, but isn't necessarily like a bad person. For example, we had to watch this short film, which is actually 40 minutes long, called Life Lessons. And in that one, the protagonist is this artist, and the antagonist is the woman that the artist like loves, but she's kind of like planning on leaving him. But we don't like hate this woman. Like, she's not an evil person because she wants to leave like the artist, but she does go against his desires, which makes her the antagonist. Then there's a physical obstruction, which would be like something maybe in nature, and that's like, it forces the protagonist to take action because, you know, they gotta either confront it, like if it's a bridge has fallen, like they either gotta somehow cross the divide without the bridge, or they gotta go a different way. Like the protagonist has to choose what to do in this case, because they literally can't move forward without this physical, because this physical obstacle has come into play. And then there's the inner obstacles, which tend to be like the character themselves. So that could be fear or pride, jealousy, anything that the character has to kind of overcome within in order to overcome the external goal. Then there's the mystic forces, which is like another specific example. So that could be like a paranormal thing, like a vampire or something, or supernatural, maybe like a superhero, you know, something that doesn't really work. But mystic forces can also be kind of in line with society here, because it could be like moral or ethical codes of certain like societies and cultures that a protagonist has to kind of decide if they're going to live by those codes or not. Like the outlaw cowboy, like with Robin Hood. Like Robin Hood has his very own moral code where he steals from the rich to give to the needy, right? So he has to kind of decide how he wants to like live by that rule, and he has his own rule that doesn't really fit into the social norm, which could be an obstacle for him. Now, every time that a protagonist confronts an obstacle, she encounters a crisis. And that may sound really dramatic, but a crisis is just a definite point in the rising action. And these are important because crises, like, they build suspense. Like, are you going to make it or not? So you need to like put these in your project, and they, as I said earlier, they need to escalate. But then there are also complications, and complications are different from obstacles because an obstacle poses an immediate threat. Like, there is a bull running at me and I need to do something about it. That's an immediate obstacle. That's an immediate threat. Whereas a complication is something that makes it harder for you to achieve your goal, but it's not something like right away. So that could be like a miscommunication, a misunderstanding. That could be like circumstances that just make it harder for you to accomplish something. So it's a little more like fluid with what a complication could be. And now we're coming up to the point where like we gotta get to the midpoint. So a strong midpoint will have an action that surprises us. This could be like a character that we weren't expecting appears, or we thought we were almost there, but all of a sudden we're like, oh wait a second, we're actually much farther from realizing the goal than we thought. And this is after the midpoint comes like the main crisis. And there could be a little more crises leading up to it depending on how long the film is. But the main crisis is not like those little crises where like you had to cross a river and there was no bridge or something. This is the big problem. So like with Lord of the Rings, it's like, will we defeat the Dark Lord or not? And you can only defeat him if the ring is in the fire. So like that is a very specific solution for the problem that needs to happen. So that's like a great thing because an audience can really easily track like, well, did that happen or not? Like, did we accomplish this goal? And this also means that this crisis leading up to the big climax, this is be the highest point in the film as far as tension goes and excitement. If someone can fall asleep during this point, it's not good. Like, one of my friends fell asleep once in the battle, in the battle from the Chronicles of Narnia, like the first one. Or maybe she's just really tired, but like, you don't want to fall asleep in the big battle. Like, that is not the point. That is absolutely not the point. So yeah, so it's the most exciting point in the drama, and this is where the conflict has to be resolved. Like, it has to be resolved one way or the other. You can pick, if you're like the screenwriter, like you can decide, does the protagonist win or lose? And they have to win or lose. You could say though they get their want but not what their need, or they get their need but not their want, but you have to decide really, are they gonna win or lose? Because if you're a great master, maybe you can like equivocate and make a good film. But if you're like starting out like me, like you gotta win or lose. You just gotta. And because the audience needs to decide kind of if you won or lost. And it has to be a visually resolved conflict. Visual and emotional. Show, not tell. We have to see them win or lose. I didn't make up this rule, okay? It's in the books. Literally in the book. And then after the climax is resolved, or the conflict of the climax is resolved, we have the resolution or the falling action. Now, this can be very short or not so short, depending on how long the film is, and I generally think that like you really shouldn't drag out a resolution, but if you need to tie up some loose ends, then you have to do that. There's not a problem in doing that. The important thing is to remember that you don't really want to tie up all the loose ends. Like in a Disney movie, and they all live happily ever after, that's one thing, okay? It's a Disney movie, and that's like kind of what you expect from a fairy tale. But in real life, like once the couple gets married, it's not like, boop, it's not done. Like they have a life beyond that. Your characters live beyond the film barriers. They probably existed before, and they're gonna exist after if they didn't die. So you have to remember that while the film is over, their story is not. So you just have to tie up enough things that the main conflict is resolved and the audience understands that part of the story, but you want them to leave your film being like, I wonder what happens next. Because that means they were really engaged and participated in your story world, which is really like the whole point of making a story. And I guess the last thing I want to mention is that the parameters of the story world need to be realigned with the resolution. So when your film begins, there's certain like kind of a balance, and then something upsets that balance, and that like is the inciting incident, which kicks off the big conflict. Then that balance is totally off, and the kind of story is about trying to figure out how to get it back to a new normal. whether it's good, because it's not going to go all the way back to its original place. Like, that really can't happen. But in the resolution, regardless of what happened in the conflict and climax, like whether or not you succeeded or failed, there's a new normal, and that's what the resolution is establishing. So that's all I want to say. I hope this wasn't too confusing. I know I threw out a lot of terms, so if anything is confusing, please comment down below and I will do my best to answer you and help explain something. If you really liked this type of video where I go like in depth with this, I do. I did have to have my like film Friday, I used to have like my film Friday series, but I know those didn't really take off that much. So I do obviously love talking about film, so maybe I will try to do more, not every week, but maybe every other week try to do a film video. I am going to do a character video pretty soon though, because that was also requested. But if there's other parts of cinema that you would be interested in learning about, please let me know. And yeah, so comment, like, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.
I was kissing you with my eyes open.